Everyone. This is Dr. Ray Lindley, the Executive Director of Array Global Educational Services. Again, we're just really pleased to be bringing what we think is a wonderful workshop to you. We've been presenting these workshops on a monthly basis, and I so much appreciate all of the kind comments that we've received. Before we begin the workshop today, I want to make an introduction to you and have you welcome Dr. Mahgoub Al-Arabi. Dr. Mahgoub has just recently joined us as the Associate Director of Array Global. We are so excited to have him. He's located in Riyadh and is head of a company there that has several schools, and he has been working with us now for a couple of months. So I want you to help me welcome Dr. Mahgoub to this workshop. And Dr. Mahgoub, feel free to just share with us anything you'd like to share. I hope you all get to know this man, even though he is in Saudi Arabia. He's Associate Director for all of Array Global. So he is available to people from any country, just as Dr. Jake and I are. So Dr. Mahgoub, welcome, and glad to have you with us.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ray, for this introduction. Hi, and welcome everybody to our monthly workshop. This is Mahgoub Al-Arabi, the Assistant Director at Array Global Education Services. Actually, it's my great pleasure to work with such great people and professional educators at Array Global, like Dr. Ray, Dr. Jacob, Dr. Danny, Miss Kelly, and all the Array team members. At Array Global, we believe in the importance of accreditation in ensuring that schools are credible and provide quality education. Accreditation helps see where a school is in terms of meeting the necessary quality standards. Accreditations afford the opportunity for continuous improvement of institution and educational programs and help to outline goals for improvement in the whole teaching learning process. Accreditation, as you know, puts a stamp of approval on graduates. That's to say that graduating from an accredited school is for sure makes some difference, and that indicates that graduates are expected to be ready for university and career. To sum up, accreditation means a lot to schools. Let me tell you honestly and frankly that we at Array Global provide real and outstanding services to schools all over the world. We provide K-12 schools accreditation for primary, middle, high, international, national, and post-secondary vocational and distance learning institutions. We also certify STEM or STEAM stream programs, specialized educational programs, and educational consulting providers. We consult also an institution at any phase level for any part of the educational programs. We help provide professional development or PD for administrator, teachers, and support staff to ensure all staff are using the best education practices. Array Global Educational Association provides regular and cooperative dialogue and support for teachers, administrators, and owners. Array Global provides awards and recognition to highlight exceptional students, teachers, administrators, and institutional activities and programs. We at Array Global ensure that distance-based education helps all schools and students have the same opportunity to receive a quality education regardless of where the students are or where their family situation. Also, we have something which is amazing. I'd like to talk about, which is external assessment, which allows institutions to measure and compare their students' progress and performance throughout the region and throughout the world. We also hold academic competitions to give institutions and the students an opportunity to compete. Also, we build the relationship with other institutions and the students around the world while improving students' academic achievements. Last but not least, we all are open to help and support for all schools, anytime and anywhere. Thank you so much, and allow me to pass the mic to Dr. Jacob.
Great, thank you, Dr. Magoub, and I'll pass the mic to Dr. Jake. He is going to introduce the workshop today and the presenters. We've tried to present these workshops based on your requests. And today, I think the workshop you're going to find is going to be something that you've requested, and we're happy to present to you. So Dr. Jake, it's yours, and you can introduce the workshop.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Ray. Thank you, Dr. Magoub. It's great to be here with you. I know now is a busy time and a happy time for many of you who are Muslim, and we just like to give you a happy Ramadan and hope all is well during this Ramadan time. This workshop, we're really excited to have this workshop. It's really helping schools to prioritize what to really focus on and teach since we've been dealing with this pandemic, and we've been dealing with this difficult situation that we've been facing in doing a lot of online schooling or a hybrid model that you may have, or bringing students back just for short periods of time. Before we get into the presenters, I'd just like to remind everyone, if you have questions, please post them in the chat. We'd love to hear what some of your thoughts and your ideas are. And then also, if we see a theme that are coming out of the chat, we will interrupt Ms. Kelly and Mr. Danny and interject and let them give us their thoughts and feelings about some of the questions that you may have. We have some members of the ministries from various countries here with us. We give them a special welcome, and all those who are our partners or coordinators throughout the world, and welcome you to our workshop here. One thing, like Dr. Magoub said, is Array Global offers many different services. And one of the services that we offer is academic competitions. And I just want to make sure everyone is aware of our academic competition, our science fair. It's an online science fair. We've had many people sign up for this science fair. I will post it in the chat, but we encourage you to get onto our Facebook page or our website and sign your students up, because we have different categories for the youngest all the way to your high school students. So we'd love to have as many students participate as possible. We have awards and recognitions that we're going to be giving out, and certificates to students. So please join in on that. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Danny Eichelberger. Danny, I've traveled with a number of times. He and I were in Erbil, Iraq about 18 months ago, and had an amazing visit right before COVID hit, a few months before COVID hit. And I've seen him present many times, and we're excited to have him on to talk about this very important topic. And he's brought on Miss Kelly Barber from Reno, Nevada. They're both from Nevada. Danny's from Las Vegas, which many of you know where Las Vegas is, or have heard about Las Vegas. Kelly's from a little bit less well-known Reno, but still a wonderful place in the state of Nevada. And we'd love to turn the time over to them, and we're looking forward to listening to their guidance and experience.
Great, thank you, Dr. Frankum. Thank you. Dr. Magoub, Dr. Lindley, Dr. Frankum, thank you so much. And thank you, Kelly, for joining today from Reno. We are excited. I know that some of you I was able to meet with even last summer as we were embarking on getting past like total shutdown and pandemic. And then we were seeing what the world would look like in an educational setting going into the fall of 2020. And it's been a long ride. And so it's great to join you again as friends and colleagues. And we're excited for the opportunity to just talk about where we've been, where we're going. And we thought it was probably a great time. I know most of what we were dealing with during the pandemic was almost survival level skills. Is how do we make sure as teachers that we are taking care of our students, that we're giving the best options, that we're freshening up on our skills with virtual learning. So that seemed like as a lifetime ago that we were worried about those things, and now those are kind of under our belt. And in some ways, some of the things that we did virtually helped some students a lot, and some didn't flourish under that environment. So we are looking at ways that we can talk and discuss and help each other to move education into 2021, and to really help reinvigorate our campus, our schools, and make sure that we're doing our best job to make up learning gaps. So we talked about our objectives today, being prioritizing instructional content. We're going to talk about specifically language arts, English, and mathematics. We're going to talk about closing the achievement gap, those things that might have fallen off. And we've really got what I consider a nice take on what that looks like and how to strategize that as a school, as a grade level, as you're working with your teams. And then also addressing unfinished learning in the context of grade level work. What does that mean? You know, what parts do you hold yourself responsible to make up, and what does that look like? And then academic recovery after COVID-19. So those are topics we'd like to stay focused on. And as we move forward, thinking about that focus. As you listen to today's presentation, we're going to ask you at the end to think about what, if anything, will change the way you're doing work, the work you're doing with your students. Think about the things that you can take home and implement. We really want to use your time wisely, and we feel so thankful that you would spend your day with us. So we want to talk a little bit about the bad, the ugly, and the good of what's happened in the last year. The bad was we felt like students have experienced extreme adversity during the last year, maybe more so than we realized. I think from my perspective as a principal, what I learned really quickly was that if students were struggling and they weren't logging in regularly, or they were not having as much success as their peers, always, it was something social and emotional going on. There was a stress in the home that they couldn't handle. Maybe both parents were at work. Maybe they were having the stress of technological issues, things that were making life very difficult. Maybe there was things going on in the home that made learning very difficult. So we learned that we were doing a lot of home visits and a lot of work with our counselors because there were things going on, and we were made aware of things just by obviously how much and how often a student was logging in, if they were even, comfortable showing their face on screen, things like that. If parents were calling us and telling us about new behaviors. Kind of one other part of this pandemic that we felt was kind of ugly was realizing how far off we were paying attention to those social emotional issues. The welfare of our children does come, and we realized it has to come first before learning can take place. I use that 24%. The statistics show that there was a 24% increase in students going to facilities for psychological issues, social, emotional issues. So it was a huge uptick, and there was a lot that needed to happen before, like I said, students could learn. But I think the really cool thing and the great thing about all this is that we got better at what we're doing. We started, I think we as a, globally, we just started to realize that so much of what we do is interrelated. And we found that we can help students with a whole range of skills that matter, including an acknowledgement and growth in their gaps and in their growth educationally, socially, and emotionally. So I know that for us, it felt a little bit like going slow to go fast, but that's where we're at. And Kelly has really helped me a lot on this presentation to make sure that we're talking about what that means to go slow to go fast. And because most of us don't want to lose an inch. I know that at my school, teachers put a lot of pressure on themselves to not lose any depth. I mean, they're used to, they're very high performing school. So my teachers put a lot of stress on themselves to maximize minutes and time with students. Sometimes I feel to their own peril that they were not necessarily taking care of their own needs, and that they were getting a little bit wore out and a little stressed. We talked about that a little bit last summer because it was a very different pressure coming out of last spring to coming into this year. And so, yeah, that's what we wanted to talk about. We wanted to not the focus of this is going to be about the instruction, but we didn't want to not acknowledge the fact that we know those things are coming back. When I have a couple scenarios at my school where, there was a little bit of a period where there was grace and students were on best behavior, but it didn't take long that students that have been out of commission, not working with other students and not having interaction, some of those bad habits or things that they had not been growing and developing over last year started to show up. We started to see students, just even a little bit of time on the playground, they were just aggressive, and we had to come in and talk and really work with students and see what was going on and try to give them a well-rounded support. But as a school, I also say, from the leadership perspective and from the teacher perspective, we also didn't want to completely have no focus on instruction. We really wanted to have some wins. And at our school, we kept our focus specifically, and I'm glad we talked about science. We've had some declining scores in science that we didn't like, and we were trying to improve prior to the COVID. And so what we did was we made a huge focus. We did all of our instructional rounds, and we looked at instruction around science grades K through 5. In the United States, we do our major testing, or in Nevada, we do our major testing around 5th grade. So it's those skill sets and that instruction in science that goes up to 5th grade becomes very important. So we did a science camp last weekend. We talked about major science standards around the what we call the NGSS, and we did a lot of work there. So every school I know is going, hey, what is our focus? We don't want to stress everyone out and stare at too many things. Ours personally was science, because we felt like where there was a lot of information going out globally about COVID, and there was very different reactions to the pandemic and the virus. We wanted students to become really good scientists, to really know how to inquire, to know how to garner knowledge, how to use it effectively, how to problem solve. So that was one thing that we really thought, if we can make students good readers, process information, make them good writers, then we could make them perform. They could help them perform really well. So we're going to talk about that, and every school will be different, but Kelly and I wanted to obviously make our focus on those standards of math and English. And we wanted to see some wins there. So we talked about this. If you've been in my presentations any time in the past, we've talked about where do we concentrate our efforts? How do we have a common thread of discussion? And this is a website, we'll give you this at the end, called achievethecore.org. And in there, they give you those standards of each grade level that are areas of focus, so that when students come through that grade level, there's a common language and things they have to know to be effective in the next grade level. And I love this document because it talks about 3 things. It talks about major clusters, supporting clusters, and additional clusters. So as a teacher, you know where your focus has to be. And Kelly, you can probably remind me, is I think somewhere between 75 and 80% of your instructional time for teachers should be in those major clusters, those green boxes. In there in kindergarten, it says it looks at kindergarten standards. Great place to start. Know number names and count sequence. Count to tell the number of objects. So as you're talking and developing these thoughts as a team, there's a guidance for this in the area of math, where you know that that's something that builds and it spirals from one grade level to the next. And this is a place where you can't lose any traction. So this is a good guide as you're working with a team. You might have a team with some young teachers that are new to the profession, do not know the standards very well. This is a great document to put in front of them to help you on your road to recovery from COVID. And
Awesome.
I'm going to turn the time over to Kelly.
Awesome. Thanks, Danny.
Mhm.
I'm excited to be working with you all, and just I want to ground in what we're talking about when we talk about learning loss. We know that every year students have some sort of learning loss, but what we know because of COVID and because of loss of instruction time, because of some of those issues Danny talked about, we know that there is this year, this amplified learning loss, and even into next year as many schools were closed over the last year. So one thing that has always happened is this unfinished learning. So we do know that even in the past, prior to COVID, we know that teachers taught something, right? But maybe not all students learned it. So we call that unfinished learning. That's something that's always been happening in education. Another thing that's always been happening in education is this unfinished teaching, right? So I have these standards to teach, or I have this curriculum to teach, or I have these things I know that my students need to learn, but I didn't have time to teach them everything. We call that unfinished teaching. And then we just know over time and over breaks, over the summer, we have just natural learning loss. Kids do lose some information over the summer or over time or extended periods of time not in school. So there is that natural learning loss. But what we're really dealing with now is this compounding impact of all of these things happening right now. So I think another good thing that came out of COVID is now we need to stop and say, okay, we know unfinished learning has been happening. We know unfinished teaching is happening. We know summer happens and learning loss happens for our kids. So what as teachers, what as leaders, what as grade levels do we need to do to ensure that we aren't making those gaps bigger, that we aren't attributing to that unfinished teaching or even that unfinished learning? How can we make sure that we're addressing these things and helping students make sure that they have the most learning that they can have? So when thinking about that, the next part I want to address is what we call stop and drop versus just-in-time intervention. And when we talked in the last slide about unfinished teaching, this happens in I work with schools all over the United States, and this happens in schools all over the US. So I assume that it's happening in schools where you're at as well, is you just don't have time to teach everything you need to teach, right? So instead we need to think about what are those important things like Danny was talking about that we need to ensure our kids get so that they can be successful as they move through the grades. So if we're talking about stop and drop, what we're saying is, so I have my 4th grade standards here. I have my 4th grade curriculum, whatever I'm teaching in 4th grade. And I'm saying, well, I didn't have time to teach all of 4th grade because of COVID, we closed, because of online schooling, things closed. So my 5th grade year, I'm going to say, okay, everything we didn't teach in 4th grade, I'm going to pick up in 5th grade. We can't do that, because then what happens is we are just making that gap bigger, because now I'm not going to have time to get to my 5th grade content, right? So if I say, okay, well, as a 5th grade teacher, I'm going to stop and I'm going to do what the 4th grade teacher missed and do my 5th grade content. Well, then we're just setting 6th grade teachers up for a disaster as well, right? And we're constantly widening that gap. We're constantly making that unfinished teaching a reality for our students. So that's not something that we can do or that we have time to do with our students, right? Instead, what we need to really do and what we really need to focus on is what we're going to talk about today, and it's targeted and just-in-time intervention. And this isn't new, and it's not just because of COVID. This is just what we say. We need to, as teachers, as leaders, we need to focus on what is it our students need to know and how can we plan effectively so that our students can get the most out of what we're teaching. So what this is showing you here, this can be a little bit confusing, but I want to kind of go over it with you, and then I'll show you another slide with it. But what we're going to talk about is this targeted just-in-time intervention. And when you see those solid black lines, the ones that are vertical, those are when I need to say, okay, my students maybe in 4th grade, the 4th grade did not get this content. So I do need to stop and I do need to teach some 4th grade content. Notice it's just a small little chunk, right? But they need to do that in order for them to access my 5th grade content. So that might happen sometimes, but as the teacher, I need to understand then what the fourth grade content was, and I need to understand what my content is. So as you're seeing, it's going to take some planning. It's going to take some thinking around what are the expectations of your students, what gaps do they have, and how can we address them? The horizontal bars there, you'll notice are smaller, like at the top. That's when we say sprinkle in, right? We can sprinkle in some knowledge that the kids might need to access my standards. So I can add a few of my fourth grade materials in there, but along with my fifth grade content, right? So I'm not stopping my fifth grade content in those bars, right? I'm continuing with my fifth grade content, sprinkling in that fourth grade content. Not an easy task, right? So when we think about this work, we think about how can we work with grade level teams? How can we really ensure we have the time to do this planning? And so talking with you now about it, this is probably something you need to be thinking about for next year. How are you going to structure your year next year to ensure that you are providing this just-in-time intervention for your students? So this is just going to go into a little bit more detail to tell you that just-in-time intervention. But this line here is saying, okay, before I start my fifth grade content, I need to do a unit in fourth grade. And I'm going to show you some resources and tools to help you say, well, how do I know what content they didn't get in fourth grade? Or how do I know what content is the most important from fourth grade? There's some free resources out there on the website Danny was talking about from Student Achievement Partners that really have done this work for you and helped you to see, okay, here are the standards I need to ensure my fifth grade students got in fourth grade. And here are some maybe that weren't as important, that if they don't have these, it's not going to make the most impact on them. So, and as we think about this, and just as I said, this is that layering of support within the grade level content that we're talking about. And then as we go through, maybe some other times, not just at the beginning of the year, we might need to add in some other things for the students. That's where that just in time comes in. Oftentimes teachers think, okay, well, I'm just gonna preload all the fourth grade stuff at the beginning. Well, it might not be the right time because the unit that they're coming to in fifth grade might not need that information until halfway through. And that's what this line is showing you right here. And I know this is a lot to take in, a lot to think about, and I'm going to take you through step by step, sort of how you might go about doing this. I don't know if there's any, I can't see the chat. I don't know if there's been any questions in there about this, or Danny, if there's anything you want to reiterate from what I was talking about, the stop and drop, which we're saying don't do, it's not beneficial for kids, versus the just-in-time intervention.
No, I think we're okay right now. There hasn't been
Kelly, I'm sorry, Danny.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to, Kelly, I was going to say, what you're talking about is so important in the area of accreditation. We call it scope and sequence. The fourth grade teacher needs to know what happens at other grade levels, the fifth grade teacher, so forth, because how can you really help individual students? And that's an accreditation issue. And when we accredit schools, we look to see if they really have an understanding of this scope and sequence. So what you've emphasized here is that, wow, if we know what's going to happen next or what should have happened last, we can help the students. I'm sorry, Danny, I interrupted you.
No, you're totally fine. And you know, one thing you said, Kelly, that resonated with me, just was super helpful is, yeah, quickly a school can become what I call over remediated, where everybody doesn't trust, you start to lose trust in your students, but it's really a teacher-based issue. Is if I weave these things in at the time when it's appropriate, a student can gather that knowledge when they can use it. But when you give them knowledge at a time when they can't effectively use it or put it into practice, you're kind of putting them behind. So I appreciate you saying that.
Danny, there was a question in the chat from Feruz. He asked, is it just applicable to high school or to college education? I'm assuming this is applicable from kindergarten all the way up through college. And I also wanted to make a comment. I would think that one of the biggest struggles is probably the communication between one grade to the next grade. Do you have any feedback, you or Kelly have any feedback on that?
And to answer your question, yes, the examples I'm going to give you actually K-8, but it does affect it, all grades. I would say, what was the second part of your question?
Probably the biggest struggle that I would see being an administrator is making sure there's that communication between
Yep.
one grade level to the next. Because
Right.
as you know, some teachers saying, well, he's in 5th grade now, we're just moving forward with 5th grade because that's what we're supposed to be. But I would assume we really need to communicate and hone in on that.
Right. And I don't know how many school leaders we have here, if it's mainly just teachers, not just teachers, the important people, the teachers, right?
Careful with that one, Kelly.
The teachers really have to, if they're not given that time to work across grade levels, you really need to advocate it to your leaders, right? We need to talk to leaders and say, I need time to talk to my 3rd grade team if I'm a 4th grade teacher, because I need to see what did they actually get to this year and what didn't. If I don't have that time, it might be some simple assessments that I need to give my kids to see where are they at, right? We don't want to over assess our kids, but there can be some quick like in math, there can be some quick math problems I can give my kids and say, okay, where are they at? And I can look at the data that I'm getting from those problems to really ensure that I know what they got. So if you're new to the school or a teacher's new and they don't know what the 3rd grade covered, you can still do that by using some assessments. And I can share some of those resources with you as well. Did that answer your question, Jacob?
Yeah, I think so. And it's kind of precipitated some other ideas and thoughts in the chat about
Awesome.
making sure that we're assessing students appropriately and getting that data so we can move forward with that.
Right.
Well, and also there was a comment from Ahmed about does the exam lose its validity then if we're doing this and trying to make up for things? Is the exam really valid? I think that's the question that Ahmed is asking.
I think it's absolutely valid. I think if as the teacher, I'm trying to figure out what my 4th grade kids know so I can teach them for 5th grade, I want to pick some high quality problems to see if they can solve. Doesn't have to be from the assessment itself. It can be from the curriculum I'm using. It can be from some of the resources that I'm showing you so that we can see what knowledge do they know. It doesn't have to be the same problems from the exam, right? But if we're teaching to a bar, if we're teaching to, and I know in the US here we use the standards, right? If we're teaching to the standard, can I pick problems that are aligned to the standard and then see if my kids can answer those problems? And so I don't think it ruins the validity of the test, right? We're teaching to the standard and we want to ensure that our kids really know the content of what that standard is asking of them. And so as teachers, we need to understand the standard, or we need to understand that bar that we want our kids to get to. And then what materials, what resources, what things do we have that align to that we can put in front of kids to help them through this.
Kelly, there was a question about areas of content like science where there's more description needed. And this is my thought on that, and only because I've kind of gone through this cycle as a school and looked at 3 years of data at this school. So what happens at a school like this, we have a STEM teacher, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, that teaches lessons like a specialist. She's in classes in every grade level every week. So students are getting tons of exposure to hands-on critical thinking, problem solving, scientific, they're getting their hands around it. The problem is happening is once you get kind of a testing mindset in science, you realize that it's a reading writing test. So what we've done is say, hey, let's not lose our love and fervor for science and experimentation. Let's keep that rich and rigorous from grades K-5. So that by the time you have a year where there's testing, those students have a rich, they have a Rolodex, a profile of all these great experiments they've had. They know content language, they have the vocabulary. Now you're just telling them, when you sit in front of an assessment and they're asking you this, pour that onto the paper. Let that come onto the paper so that you're not just leading only with assessment. You really have the students have a 5-year body of great knowledge, and that so by the time that they're taking an assessment, they draw that and pull that into the way they write, the way they think, how they prove, the strategy, what strategy are they using to put pen to paper to show the reader that they know and they can think critically and bring all their thoughts onto paper.
I really appreciate all the questions around science. I don't even know if Danny knew this, but my background, I was the STEM coordinator for our school district for 5 years. So my passion actually started out in science. I was a science teacher. And so what I would say to all of that, STEM is super important in that it's not math in isolation, right? Or engineering in isolation, or that reading and writing in isolation. It's really bringing all of these things together. So although Danny and I are just talking about math and ELA today, that doesn't take away from what we need to be focusing on in science or in STEM, right? Because we know that if we're doing STEM at our schools, or if we're a STEM school, there is math going on. There is a ton of reading and writing. But just like Danny talked about at the beginning, right? If we're talking about science and you're a science teacher in here saying, how do I make this meaningful for me? It's that what is the most important things that your kids need to know in your science class? What are they? And then that's your focus, right? You spend your time focusing on the things that really matter. And then you backwards plan and you say, okay, what should they already know about this coming into my grade level? And what haven't they gotten? And you can use that same just-in-time intervention for science that we were talking about for this math, right? Like, what holes and gaps do they have, and where and when do I need to fill them, right? I'm not going to fill their gaps around chemistry, maybe when I'm doing something around this physics lesson, because it just doesn't make sense. But really making sure that I'm filling those gaps when I fill them. So I hope that was helpful for our science folks out there. We're going to go back to the math piece, and sometimes we want to think big picture. So if I'm a K2 leader, teacher, what I really want to make sure in math is that I'm not jumping straight to that algorithm and saying, okay, I just need my kids to know what 13 plus 15 is. And so I'm just going to teach them how to do that algorithm. Instead, we really need to ensure in K2 that our kids are getting that conceptual understanding of math and of numbers. And a lot of that can happen within STEM, right? If you are a STEM school or you're working in that, a lot of that can happen in there. But it's really understanding what numbers do, how they work together. And that's really the heart of K2 math standards. And if you use those documents that Danny was showing you, it will show you that those really are what is most important in second grade. So that's the big picture K2. But what I want to show you is a specific example. And I know this is a lot on the screen, but I do want to tell you that there are some resources that can really help you with this. This is just a chart that our organization put together to help teachers like you all who are in the weeds of this work, trying to do this work. So again, that website Danny talked about, Student Achievement Partners, has some guidance and says, okay, here is what we really need kids to know in second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, right? And here's where you should focus. What we have done is we've put these into charts and we've said, okay, this is a second grade example. So my prerequisite standards here are on the left. And I know that in order for my kids to really understand this standard here, and if you don't work with standards, it's okay, right? But to really understand that 3-digit or 3-digit numbers represent the amount of hundreds, tens, and ones, my kids must understand whatever this first grade standard was. Because if they don't understand that, that's when I need to stop and reteach some of my first grade content to my second grade students, or they are not going to be able to access that second grade content. So that's what that red means. Remember in our just-in-time intervention when we saw those vertical bars, that's what the red means. I need to stop and do some teaching. What this yellow line means, before I teach 2NB2 or comparing 3-digit numbers based on the meaning, I don't need to stop and teach all of first grade stuff. Instead, I need to just throw in some problems that are going to help the kids ensure that they got what they needed in first grade. So this is just a way of looking at it as a teacher. What were my standards my first grade students needed? What are my second grade standards? And then what am I going to do to ensure that I am that I'm addressing all the standards I need to address? I do know that time, right? If we don't want our second grade standards to fall off, and we know we need to cover some of our first grade standards, we have to be really thoughtful in that planning. And here's where leaders, and here's where if you have grade level leads, can really weigh in and say, okay, I need time to talk with my team, to look at my materials and say, okay, we give you some suggestions and we say, okay, maybe you can integrate a few lessons on this topic because they're not as important as some of these other topics, and help you to make that decision between the two. So that's a lot on this screen. I do have other examples of the other grade levels as well, but I'm not sure if there's any questions in the chat that we want to jump to before I jump to the other examples.
Well, just maybe one comment that Faisalia School, one of our schools in Jeddah, made. They're preparing a kind of they said it's a minor math test, and they want to find out what their students know at this point, so that school knows what gaps to fill in the fall, so it will be very specific to that school and their students. So I thought that was a great idea, along with what you said, Kelly, because they can find out and know for sure what they're doing.
That's awesome. And that's why we're all here together, right? And I want to make sure we're honoring that chat, and you all are looking at that chat, because what we have found is working together across all of our schools across the country, we're able to illuminate some of these things for teachers and take best practices from one school and share them with another. And so hopefully this sparks some ideas and sparks some thinking, not just for you, but for your colleagues here across the world, which is so exciting. And so we're gonna zoom back out and go to this 3rd through 5th math focus. And this 3rd, 4th, and 5th, anyone that teaches 3rd, 4th, and 5th math knows fractions, right? And so what we want to focus on in 3rd grade is really understanding that fractions are numbers. Often kids don't think fractions are numbers, right? And so in order to do that, we're doing things like these shapes here, or we're using number lines. That there should be a lot of that happening in 3rd grade. And so as a 4th grade teacher, if you're noticing your kids really don't understand fractions or numbers, that might be something you might need to consider or think about. Do they understand? Can they place fractions on a number line? Can they look at these shapes here that are partitioned out, and can they say what fraction of them are highlighted or not highlighted? In 4th grade, really the focus around fractions is equivalence. And then in 5th grade, it's all around the operations and fractions. So just like our other example I gave you for 2nd grade, we have another one here for 4th grade. Same thing. And again, this is taken from the Student Achievement Partners guidance, and we have a chart here if this is something that's helpful for you. I can gladly share these resources with you as well. We have another example, 6 through 8, that big picture. But when we're talking about 6 through 8, we really want to make sure we are giving opportunities for our kids really to engage in tasks, right? To take these tasks that kids have to do multi-step, not just these simple, oh, we can't stop and say, okay, my 6th grade students still don't know their facts, so I'm just going to do facts. Or my 7th grade students still don't know multiplication, right? Well, we need to somehow figure out how can we put tasks in front of them that are going to work on their fluency with math, but also expose them to that grade level content. So when we think about 6 through 8, that big picture thinking and focus is embracing rational numbers. And then here's our 8th grade chart, very similar to that 2nd grade chart that we talked about. I want to say that when we talked about this just-in-time intervention versus stop and drop, it really is around math, right? And thinking about math, and we can think about it in science. ELA and English language arts is a little bit different. Because we know with English language arts, the thing that's really going to help our kids is engaging them in grade level complex text. So if I'm a 2nd grade teacher and I say, well, my 2nd grade students didn't get a lot of 1st grade text, so I'm just going to put them in 1st grade text. that's not going to help them. That's going to, again, widen that gap. So we need to figure out how can we put them in second grade text, but give them the scaffolds and supports that they need to access that second grade text. So if we're constantly putting lower grade level text in front of our students, that's a worry. That's something we need to think about and consider. I do know, working with schools and working with teachers, that not by third grade, there are some kids that still can't read, right? There are still some kids that are struggling and do have some gaps. So that's when we need to really think about foundational skills for our students. So on this chart here, there is some do's and don'ts. And when I talk about ELA and we talk about this work, we want to ensure we're talking about it in two buckets. ELA really is about building world knowledge, but it also is the teaching of those foundational skills for kids. Oftentimes people think foundational skills are just K2. They really aren't. There are other grade level standards in 3rd through 8th that actually talk about foundational skills that are often forgotten. And often when we have a kid who is struggling reading in 5th or 6th grade, and I know I had some high school kids struggling in science to read, and it goes way back to their foundational skills. So as a teacher, what can I do to address some of those foundational skills, even as a 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade teacher, to help my kid learn to read? Because it might not just be around comprehension. It might be some gaps in those foundational skills. We could have a whole session on foundational skills. There's so much to do, so much to know, and I don't know how much work you all have done around it, but it really has become my other passion besides science in general. But what I do want to talk to you about just two things, the foundational skills and the building knowledge. Just as we did in math, here is what we need to consider when we're thinking about K2. So when we're thinking about K2, really that focus has to be on foundational skills, because we know in K2, if we're not addressing kids learning to read, we're not addressing phonics, phonological awareness, fluency, if we're not addressing those things with kids, if they're not getting it now, they're going to fall way behind in their ELA and being able to read and even comprehend. But what's really important is it's not necessarily one size fits all when we get, to 2nd grade, right? If kids are having problems and they're not able to still read and they're having some struggles, we need to figure out what it is they're struggling with exactly. And there are some great tools and resources out there that we can share with you that can help you do all of those things. But we really need to ensure that we have a structured way to teach foundational skills. And I don't know what you all are using or what you have access to, but there are, again, free materials out there to use to help address some of these things. So the focus in K2 really is around foundational skills. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing read alouds with complex text, but there has to be that understanding those foundational skills. Just like I said, and I know this is a lot on the slide and we've shared these slides with you, but these are just some things that you can think about and do. So if I'm a teacher in 4th grade and I still have kids that are struggling to read, I need to think about what can I do as that 4th grade teacher to help my student. And so I want to really pinpoint why they're not able to read, right? What is it? Was it some missing in their phonics? Was there something missing in phonological awareness? Or is it just a fluency issue? Are they just not able to comprehend because they can't read fluently? If a student can't read fluently, they can't comprehend something. And so there are some resources, again, that can help. And if maybe adding a fluency routine to your 3rd and 4th grade and 5th grade classes might be something that you can do. And there are some free resources, again, on that website Danny talked about, but there are some resources out there to support you with that. We do know foundational skills are not the only thing, right? If all we focused on was foundational skills, we wouldn't have students that were able to read that complex text that they need to read when we get to, say, high school science, right? A lot of my kids couldn't read that textbook. They couldn't read scientific papers because they weren't exposed to complex text throughout their entire K-12 time. And so ensuring that we are using that complex text with students in balance with those foundational skills. So when we think about ELA, different than our math and our just-in-time intervention, here we really want to see what is it our kids know around foundational skills, and then how are we building their world knowledge, and just constantly be addressing those needs that the kids have, but also exposing them to grade level text. Even if they missed a year of school due to COVID, we can't forget about the high quality rich text that we need to put in front of our students. Questions about ELA? Did any come up on the chat? Or Danny, is there anything or anyone else wants to add about our ELA piece here?
Yeah, I think just going back to what you're saying, like for us, one of the major focuses, the school I'm at now is Goolsby Elementary, and it has been successful before I got here, and it continues to be. But what my point is, they have the teachers. I hear rich conversations around, even race strategies. I go back and look at the race strategies that we're thinking of. If you think about on that science test that they'll take in 5th grade, are the students able to restate what the question is? Are they able to slow down to go fast, restate what the question that they're being asked? So many times the students, and we tell students, you have 5 years of science knowledge that has been built in. Take your time. This is one of those times where more is more. Like we don't want you to speed through this and just make assumptions that the reader knows these things. Restate the question, answer the question to the best of your ability, and cite evidence from the text that you've just read. So I really like these, we call them race strategies: restate, answer, cite, and then the last, explain what it means. So from the reader wants to know from your context and from your understanding, what does it mean? And so that's what we've used as a framework for our school in almost anything and everything related to language arts is our race strategies. And the school, what I hear is a lot of language about the standards of the next grade level. So if you have to have a school-wide issue, I guess you would want everyone running fast and not slow, meaning that they trust that students, when filled in correctly, can move to the next level. And so what I hear a lot of it at a school that I consider very successful is that they're not talking about, the primary focus is not remediation or pulling instruction down. It's about, how do I elevate you to the next grade level and the standards of that grade level? So I tend to hear in every classroom teachers talking about and framing a lesson up to the next grade level. Hey, that's going to happen in 3rd grade. This is going to happen in 4th. This is how we're seeing it. This is the complexity of the questions that we're seeing around it. Because, assessments get a bad rap sometimes, but if they're well written and they guide us to help students around those standards, then it's okay. So that's just a thought I had about when you were talking about the English language arts standards. I think those English language arts standards can be the basis for success in almost every subject, because math ends up being a reading, writing test. In some ways, you have to know how to frame it and use those same race strategies. Science does, and of course, everything related to our language.
Really interesting comment. Tests can, they can be a test of what the student knows. Typical tests, you get an A, B, C, or D. But I think what you've pointed out here is these exams, tests, whatever, are really an indication for the teacher about what needs to happen. It's just as much for the teacher as for the student knowing I got an A, B, C, D, whatever. You mentioned that, and I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting addition to what you're saying here.
Thank you.
And on assessment, I'll just touch on a little bit. And like Danny was saying, if we give an assessment, we shouldn't just give it for the grade, right? We should give it because it's going to give us information as a teacher to guide our instruction or to fill those gaps that kids have or to help to accelerate them forward. We can't just give an assessment and say, okay, I gave the assessment, I gave them a grade, now I can move on. We have to, if we're going to take the time to give an assessment, we have to take the time to use the data from that assessment. But that's another soapbox as well that I could get on. But I do want to hear from you all in the chat. Want to answer one of these questions for us. I used to think what did you used to think maybe about math or ELA, but now I think you don't want to answer that one. What is something you heard today that makes you think and you want to take action on? Or maybe you're so confused and you're thinking, this was a lot of information and I still need more support with. I really want to hear from you all around what is it that you need, that you want more support around, and we'll go from there. So type in the chat your response to one of these, and then we will finish off here.
Kelly, I'll jump in and just say real quick, one thing that I learned and it made me rethink about is the way we push instruction and learning loss from the grade level before, is that it's the placement of when you put it into the instruction that matters more than just dumping a bunch of information on students because you feel like it was lost from the prior grade. Like, it has to be strategic and it has to be applied when the students are going to need it the most. And then they'll be ready to receive. I don't think they're ready to receive just because they feel like you have this sense of like loyalty to the standards of the last grade level and you're just dumping that information on them. So
yeah,
that
so
helps.
walk away with one thing, is that you need to be prepared and planned. You need to know what comes before and what you're responsible for and where your kids are at, and you need to be planned and prepared. And I know that's not an easy task and time is always an issue, but it's something to start thinking about as you begin to prepare for this next year. So I'm going to throw it over to you all.
Well, this has been tremendous. I've been sitting here taking notes and thinking, wow, there are things. I think it's important for us to all realize this has been a very unusual year for us as educators. I think next year will be an unusual year also. Hopefully unusual in the sense that we're moving ahead now that we've had all of this behind us. And I think that sometimes it's easy for us to feel defeated. Oh, this doesn't work, that didn't work, and I've been following the comments in the chat room. But I do sense that the people who have been responding are saying, yes, that helps. That's a good idea. That's a good term. So I appreciate that. What we have here is what we typically do. Both Danny and Kelly have listed their email addresses here. They have shared that they are very open to answering individual questions or having a dialogue with you if you'd like to ask them individually some particular question. Dr. Jake, is there anything else we need to share before we close?
Yeah, just a few different things. The first part is just to let you know about our workshop that's going to be taking place in May. A lot of you have kind of touched on some of these different topics that we want to focus on next month. It's what have we learned through this COVID crisis in education, and how is that going to change education? We've received that question so many times in each one of our workshops, because out of anything that happens that's bad, or most things that happen that's bad, we learn things and we're able to apply things and make things better. And so we're going to be talking specifically about how some of these different things that we've gone through are really going to change education for the future. We're going to be looking at technology. We're going to be looking at curriculum. Many of you talked about in the chat about how we need to focus on the main standards that students need to learn from moving from one grade level to the next grade level. It's going to be in a forum type workshop. This is the last workshop that we have for the year. It's going to be Dr. Ray, myself, Dr. Salam Noor, a gentleman who's on our board, and Mr. Khalid Muhammad, who's with us this evening, one of our consultants out of Jeddah. And it's going to be a great workshop that you're going to be able to interact with us, ask questions. We're going to be able to dialogue and talk specifically about how education is going to be different in the future from here on out. Also, just want to let people know, again, remind them about our science fair. Please get onto our website, get onto our Facebook page, sign your students up for our science fair. There's no charge to you, but there are prizes, there are certificates for your students, and we have a lot of students that are getting involved in it. And what a great time to do that right now at the end of the year, to let them showcase the great work that they've done. Also, I'm going to be posting, after Dr. Ray's last words, I'm going to be posting the link to fill out the survey. And the survey, you need to fill it out correctly. So we have your email address and the name that you want on your certificate. and we will be getting out those certificates by usually by Wednesday. We email them off to you. If you haven't heard from us by about Wednesday, please let us know. So other than that, Dr. Ray, it's back to you.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to say, Ahmed, thank you so much for your comment. For Kelly and Danny, if you see Ahmed's comment here, it was the goal of this workshop. And I love what Ahmed said. I used to think to finish curriculum and students understand, but now I think to focus on the most important topics. So if everybody got that message, that's wonderful, and that's where we are. I like to always finish these workshops with something for us to think about. We're going to post on the page now. I found this recently. We find some good things on the internet and some that aren't so good, but I thought, wow, these are really good things. I would encourage you, if you get anything out of these points, that you might like to even think about posting these in your classroom. Those are important things for us to know as educators, as adults, but I think it's important for our students to understand these issues. Number one, you can't change the past. It's done. We can't change it. Number two, opinions don't define your reality. What you are is not necessarily somebody else's opinion. Number three, we remember, and we've talked about this before, everyone's journey is different. Every student who comes to your learning table will have a different journey and be on a different journey. Number four, we all have to remember this, and things get better with time. Time heals all things. And a number five, I really like, what goes around comes around. You know, we keep saying this, you know, good turns around to good. Bad turns around to bad. And number six, judgments are a confession of character. The judgments that we make define what kind of character we have. 6, 7, we find our happiness within. It's not outside of us, it's within us. Smiles are contagious. I see Kelly just smiling big time here, but smiles are contagious. Kindness is free. Doesn't cost anything to be kind. We can overthink, and it only leads to sadness. And you fail only if you quit. And finally, positive thoughts create positive things. So I just encourage us all to remember these 12 things to remember in life. As I said, post them in your classroom if you like. Just embed them in your thinking to remember that as educators, we are guides. We are leaders for our students. And if we can capture these thoughts, I think we'll do strong work with our students. So thank you everyone for attending today. We hope it's been helpful to you, and we appreciate so much your attendance. And we'll stay online for just a little bit if you want to ask some questions in the chat room. Thanks to Kelly and Danny for an outstanding workshop. Not only did I think it was outstanding, but I've been reading the comments of the people who have been in the chat room. So thank you so much. We're all in this together. We don't stand apart and say, well, you should, or he should, or she should. We're all in this together, and we want to help each other. So bless you all. Ramadan Mubarak to everybody, and you all have a great evening.